Hello everyone, my name's Cataclysmic Armageddon, and today we're going to be doing a mod review on the Polarities mod.
Right, now the helium's worn off. Hello everyone, I'm Cataclysmic Armageddon, and welcome to my first mod review, which is going to be on Polarities. Only took 2.5 weeks, but hey. This mod was created by Terraria Complete 30, who you've likely seen in Terraria related places. This mod showcase / review has it all. Literally, everything in the mod. I mean, just look how long this video is. Well, there isn't a segment specifically dedicated for accessories, but instead accessories worth mentioning will be mentioned throughout the video. Just a few things I'd like to say before we continue. Firstly, I don't normally like asking this, but due to how long the video took and how much effort was put into it, I'd like to ask that you leave feedback for me below, because feedback is useful to anyone when it comes to making stuff like this, and I'd love to hear your feedback on this. Secondly, I've not really done anything like this before, so you'll find I'm a bit quiet in some segments, but perk up later on, so sorry if I sound like my life's over. Thirdly, massive thank you to all of you for your patience, and even larger thank you to the Polarities team themselves, especially Turing, and a massive thank you goes out to those in my booster room who provided music for this video. Otherwise it would have probably been pretty bad music, but luckily there are plenty out there who have got a much better musical taste than I do. And also another thank you specifically for Turing for participating in parts of this video. Fourthly, all music used will be shown in the segment separators at the start of each segment, and also in the description. Right, with all that said, let's begin this massive showcase, shall we?
country wind to whisper one truth. Body the floor, bullet the roof. Ammo wheeling past, killing, gunshot shooting. Non-stop hammer, cock, violent manner shots, man alive. Keep cannon, hot cannon, I seize granite by peace. Breast, cannon, got peace, best, last man standing, gun speed, please, push, hand,
Since this segment is so short, you get my disembodied voice again. Aren't you lucky? So the fractal antidote is a very simple one. Upon drinking, you get 2 minutes of complete immunity from the fractalization debuff. Any time that you have will no longer advance until the potion wears off. The fractalization potion is pretty much the opposite of the antidote. Upon consuming the potion, it'll give you as much fractalization as you can handle before you start taking damage. This means you'll only be able to have a total of 50 seconds upon normal means. However, if you're wearing the self-similar armor, it'll take you to 12 minutes, and since at 12 minutes this is when enemies spawn and you can catch the fish that allows you to make the fractalization potions, this is a very useful potion armor combination to have. The piercing potion is a very simple one. Increases armor penetration by 6 points for 8 minutes. The tolerance potion is an interesting one. Upon consuming a healing potion, as most of you are aware, you have a 60-second cooldown before you can take the next potion. However, with the tolerance potion, it cuts the debuff in half. So if you have 60 seconds before you can use another potion, this will take it down to 30 seconds. This potion is best used when you have the Philosopher's Stone equipped, since a Philosopher's Stone reduces cooldown by 25%, meaning you'll get 45 seconds, and then you can drink the potion to cut that in half, making it even quicker for you to be able to take the next potion and re-heal yourself. However, be aware that the Tolerance potion has a 60-second cooldown of its own, which cannot be changed. Right, let's move on to the biome, shall we? First biome we'll be looking at is the Salt Cave. This Salt Cave is fairly similar to the Granite and Marble caves that you find in the vanilla game. They are small little caves, consisting of salt tiles and briny water. This briny water is considerably dangerous to the player after a long exposure. If the player comes into contact with the water, they will slowly gain an increased debuff known as desiccating. This debuff increases in seconds the longer that you stay in the water for. The moment you gain this debuff, all natural regeneration is disabled, and once the debuff reaches 10 seconds, the player will rapidly start losing health and they will get the confused debuff. Enemies in this area can also give this debuff, but the only one that will do that is the Salt Hopper. Speaking of enemies, the 3 enemies that occupy this biome are the Mussel, the Salt Hopper, and Brine Flies. The Mussel is a small stationary clam, which fires pearls in the player's direction, which arc upwards and bounce towards the player a few times before they'll break. The Salt Hopper is your common slime. It'll hop towards the player and try to cause collision damage. And you've got the Brine Flies. The Brine Flies will fly around the biome trying to come into contact with the player. They don't deal any contact damage, however they do cause the confusion debuff, which will invert your controls, which in a biome full of enemies is never the best thing to happen to you. As for the drops from these 3 enemies, the Mussel will drop the Mollusk Staff, which has been shown previously with the weapons. The Salt Hopper drops salt crystals, which can be used to make armor, and the Hopper Crystal, which provides a slight boost to jump height and grants auto jump, similar to the Frog Leg. The Hopper Crystal and the Frog Leg can be combined to make the Saltatory Leg, basically an upgraded version of the Frog Leg. However, you can also use the Saltatory Leg and the Frog Leg combined together for an even more powerful jump. And the flies drop absolutely nothing. Now, the water may be dangerous to come into contact with yourself, however, it is fishable. The 3 things you can get in this biome while fishing are brine shrimp, salt crates, and the salt killer fish staff. But this is in hard mode only. There is also a quest fish you can find here called the pickled herring. Furthermore, with this biome, due to it being considerably flat, life crystals can frequently generate in here. Now that the Salt Cave is done, let's move on to the Limestone Cave. Right, let's move on to the Limestone Cave, which is also similar to the Granite and Marble Cave, just like the Salt Cave. Similar to the salt cave, the limestone cave has a hazard of its own. Instead of the water being deadly, it's actually stalactites, which occasionally will fall down from the ceiling. These will fall down constantly around the player while in this biome. They'll shatter on impact with the ground, dealing moderate damage and potentially inflicting the broken armor debuff, making them a sizable threat, especially to the early game characters with low defense. This biome has 6 enemies, 4 in pre-hard mode and 2 in hard mode. Pre-hard mode is the Staglag Beetle. The Staglag Beetle will walk slowly towards the player, dealing high amounts of damage upon contact. In expert mode, it will occasionally spit out jets of fluid that inflict the corroding debuff, which reduces the player's defense for 30 seconds. The Alkali Spirit. Alkaline spirits will float towards the player, similar to wraiths. However, they will also occasionally perform a series of charges, similar to the Eye of Cthulhu's second phase. Flowworm. The Flowworm behaves similarly to your normal worm enemies. However, these ones attempt to jump out of the ground near the player and orient themselves to be directly above them and then fall down to cause an attack. And the Glowworm. Glowworms attach themselves to the ceiling and will spit alkaline fluid at the player, which causes the corroding debuff, reducing the player's defenses. It'll also swing back and forth while doing this exact same attack to try and cover as much area as possible, while attempting to aim in the player's general direction. In hard mode, you have the Lime Shell. Lime shells will float in the air, shooting 2 volleys of lasers, before closing their shells and flinging themselves at the player. Upon impact with the surface, they'll open back up again. And the Alkali Abomination. The Alkali Abominations are a more difficult version of the Alkaline Spirits. They have similar behaviour, but with increased health and damage. Also chase the player a lot more aggressively, with faster dashing and more frequently. They will also summon 2 Alkaline Spirits as backup when below 50% maximum health. There are several drops from these enemies. The Staglags will drop the Staglag Beetle Head. This is a helmet item that grants 10 defense, but also inflicts a darkness debuff. The Spirits, Flowworms and Abomination will drop Alkaline Fluid, which has several crafting recipes to it. The Alkali Abominations can drop the Alkaline Orb, which is a summoning weapon which was shown off before. The Lime Shells will drop Limestone Carapace, which is used for the Limestone armor set, and the Limestone Shield. As for the Stalactites which fall down, they've got a very low chance of dropping a weapon called the Speleothem. Right, that's all from the Limestone Cave, so let's move on to the next one. The final biomes are in the Fractal Dimension. This dimension is unlocked at the beginning of hard mode, where upon defeating the Wall of Flesh, a message will appear in the bottom corner saying that a chaotic rift has appeared in the sky. This rift can be found at the same level as Sky Islands are found. Upon finding a rift, locate the Fractal Altar, right-click and you'll be teleported to the Fractal Dimension. Upon entering the Fractal Dimension, the player will get a debuff called Fractalization. While the player has this debuff, all natural regen and lifesteal effects are disabled. As the timer increases, the player will start receiving damage. This can be prevented with certain items, armors and potions. Right, let's start with the Fractal Dimension itself. There are several biomes in this place. However, the enemies I am about to mention can spawn when the conditions are correct regardless of the biome you're in. When you first enter, you'll have 3 different kinds of enemies that can spawn. The Spark Crawler, which acts as a mini Plantera, which will either fire bolts of lightning at the player or fire triangle projectiles at the player. The Fractal Fern, which teleports from place to place, firing projectiles at the player, but is always stationary upon teleporting. And the Europter, which follows the player slowly, similar to an Eater of Worlds, constantly bombarding the player with a barrage of laser projectiles, which as health decreases, becomes more spread out. After Golem has been defeated, and 12 minutes of fractalization has been reached, 3 different kinds of enemies can spawn. The Mega Manga, which is a small cube which extends long chain arms in 4 cardinal directions, and moving along them attempting to align themselves with the player. Upon stopping, it releases numerous sparks above itself and to its sides in an arc-like shape, which fall slowly down and try to align themselves with the player. In expert mode, it'll fire 4 lasers, 1 from each location of where its hooks are placed. The next we have the Phantobrot. This enemy positions itself with the player, firing a barrage of lasers at the location the player previously was, moving above them and dropping down to cause collision damage, or freezing in place and rotating while spraying numerous sparks above the player which will fall down and try to align themselves with the player. And the final one being the Fractal Point. The Fractal Point is an enemy that spawns only after 12 minutes and Golem has been defeated from any enemy in the fractal dimension. It does not actively pursue the player and instead floats idly in place, serving as an obstacle. Upon being killed, it has a chance to split into 2 more Fractal Points. If touched by the player, it will explode, dealing severe damage and destroying itself instantly with no chance of splitting. The purpose of this enemy is to be a mild obstacle, but also to drop large amounts of dendritic energy, which can be used for various recipes. As for drops from these enemies, Spark Crawlers drop Light Slate, which can be used in an extractor to provide a variety of fractal dimension related materials. The Spark of Similarity, which is a small spark pet. The Fractal Fern drops fractal strands, which can be used to make certain blocks and tiles. And the Barsley Staff, which is a summoning weapon. The Euryopter drops fractal matter, which can be used to make fractal torches, fractal walls, fractal bricks, and your own fractal altar, which can be used to teleport to the dimension. The Megamenga will drop fractal ore, fractal keys to open fractal chests, Infinity Sponge, which is an improved version of the super absorbent sponge, which is capable of absorbing an infinite amount of liquid, including lava and honey, and the Porous Cuboid, which is a light pet which has been shown off previously. The Phantobrot drops dendritic energy and fractal keys, and the Fractal Points will drop dendric energy. The next part of the fractal dimension is the Fractal Wastes. 2 enemies spawn in this biome, along with the others that I've mentioned previously. First one being the Amphisbena and the Bisector, which is an underground enemy. The Amphisbena, which spawns in the Fractal Wastes, it's similar to a rattlesnake, however with 2 heads, one for the left, one for the right. It does not produce a rattling noise as a warning, and upon attacking the player or being hit, it'll teleport to a random nearby point. When the Amphisbena is below 50% HP, the player can catch it in a bug net and turn it into a hat. And the Bisector, which spawns in the underground Fractal Wastes. This enemy acts like your normal worm, however it'll try to align itself with the player in a variety of directions and then charge at the player. As its health decreases, it gains additional charging points that it can lock onto. Both these enemies only drop Fractal Dust, which are only useful for making tiles. The Fractal Ocean has one additional enemy, being the Orthoconic. This enemy will fly around, charge at the player, and releases sparks from above itself, which will fall down and try to align itself with the player as they fall. The Orthoconic drops fractal ore, fractal keys, and the cone gun. You can also fish in the Fractal Ocean, getting a variety of fish depending on how long you've been in the fractal biome for and your level of fractalization, fractal crates if under 12 minutes, and the semi-similar crate if you've got 12 minutes of fractalization. There is also a quest fish in this biome. And the final biome being the Dendric Skies. One additional enemy can spawn here, being the Shockflake, which spins while chasing the player, moving towards them at a constant speed, spins in place, building up speed before suddenly dashing at the player at high velocities, orbiting around the player for a short time, stopping, then firing 6 bolts of energy outwards from its points, stops in place, spins, and releases 3 waves of energy bolts in quick succession. And like its namesake, the Dendric Skies is filled with dendric energy, which can be mined after 5 minutes of fractalization. The items you can get from unlocked fractal chests is Light Slate, which can go through an extractor and give you a variety of goods, similar to Slush, fractal bars, a variety of weapons, a Twisted Mirror which respawns you back into the fractal dimension, or if you're already in the dimension, respawns you back to the spawn point, however removes all your fractalization, a Fractal Antenna which reduces damage upon certain conditions being met, and the Atoni Charm, which can be used to teleport very short distances and give the Chaos State debuff for 1 second. Moving on to the locked fractal chest, you'll find Light Slate, Dendritic Energy, Self-Similar Bar, these weapons, the Fractal Absorber, which when equipped will reduce the rate at which fractalization progresses by 2/3, meaning it takes 3 seconds of real time to add 1 second of fractalization. The Fractal Eye, which is an accessory which when equipped will summon Fractal Eye minions that orbit around the player, taking up minion slots after a short time. They will not attack on their own and instead react to the player's use of the attack input, so when the player uses the weapon, the Fractal Eyes will attack. The Chaos Flower, which is an accessory which when equipped will cause orbs to double the number of minions that are summoned upon use, and the Fractal Dragon Wings, which have a high ascent speed, long flight time, and when pressing down will cause the player to dive down at high speed. Right, this part's going to be a tiny bit different. This one's about the Pestilence Event. This is a hard mode event that can only be triggered after all 3 mechanical bosses have been defeated. It's triggered using the Putrid Lore in the Crimson or the Corruption. While active, there are several new enemies themed around the evil biomes that'll spawn to attack the player. As the event progresses, instead of it ending, when the bar reaches 100% that the event is over, Esophage will spawn. This is one way of spawning Esophage. Now the way I'll be showing these off is I'll just have the enemies themselves just doing their thing, and then I'll be showing off what they drop in particular. So here's the Pestilence Event. Alrighty then, let's get on with some bosses, shall we? The first boss of the mod is the Stormed Cloudfish. This boss has 1800 HP in normal mode and 2880 in expert mode, with 0 defense. The boss has several drops, being the Storm Chunk, which can be used to make armor and some weaponry, the Storm Core, which when equipped will gradually summon Cloudfish minions from the sky as long as the player is on the surface layer. The Cloudfish minions attack by swarming enemies to deal rapid hits of 1 damage, and are particularly effective on stationary mid-air enemies. Each Cloudfish only takes up a 1/6 of a minion slot, allowing up to 6 to be summoned at once, with only 1 slot. The Sky Hook, which was shown off previously, This hook cannot grapple onto blocks, however it can grapple onto the air. The strange barometer, which can either turn the rain on or turn the rain off. The futuristic bowl, which is a pet. The Cloudfish trophy. The Cloudfish mask. Then you've got the expert only items, being the Storm Roe, which is a small fish pet, and the Storm Scales, which causes the player to increase in defense and reduce enemy aggro at low HP, up to a maximum of 8 defense. And then we have the flawless item, being the Eye of the Stormfish. This weapon creates a cloudy vortex around the cursor that spirals inwards, firing an instant bolt of lightning in the direction of the cursor's current position, after about half a second. Right, that's all to do with Stormed Cloudfish. Now onto the fight itself.
For king and country! No!
Next up is Star Construct. This is a post-Eater of Worlds Brain of Cthulhu boss. There are two ways to fight this. You can either wait for one to spawn by itself, where it will fall from the sky, or you can summon it with a stellar remote, which will also cause it to fall dormantly from the sky. In its dormant state it has 200 HP, which when removed will trigger the fight. The boss has several drops as well. It drops a Sky Mill, in case you can't find one on a sky island, up to 12 to 24 sun plate bars, depending on if you're on normal or expert mode. This can be used to make armor and weapons. The Stellar Signet, which when equipped will restore 200 mana instead of 100 mana upon collecting mana stars dropped by enemies. The Star Hook, which launches 4 grappling hooks at a time. The Strange Clock, the Star Clock, which when used makes time move much faster, but only when held, accelerating the day or night cycle significantly. The Star Construct Trophy, the Star Construct Mask. Now for the expert only stuff. The Cosmic Communicator, which is a small Star Construct pet. And the Cosmic Cable, which increases stats of grappling hooks by increasing their speed or distance. And the flawless item being the Star Dance, which when used fires a set of 5 lances outwards. They slowly come to a stop before turning towards the target and launching themselves at it. They'll continue to home in and attack the target up to 3 times before disappearing, however will instantly disappear if coming into contact with tiles. And that's Star Construct. On with the fight. Gigabat time. Gigabat cannot spawn naturally. There are two ways to summon it, being gem fireflies, which increases the chance of it spawning, but won't guarantee it, or for a guaranteed spawn, using the bat whistle will instantly summon the boss. Gigabat's drops are the bat sigil. This grants more minion slots the lower your health is, up to a maximum of 3. The bat arrow, which is a sort of early game homing arrow. Not too good, but it's certainly great for the early game. And the Echo Staff, which fires a small projectile which, when coming into contact with anything, will deal 1 to 2 damage and then grant it the debuff of Pinpointed. This debuff grants a temporary 50% boost to critical strike chance against that enemy. Then you've got the Bat Trophy, the Gigabat Mask. Right, onto the Expert drops. There's only one of them for this boss. That one is the Feral Fang. This accessory, when equipped, causes the player to get the Feral Bite debuff. However, they are also made completely immune to the debuffs that are caused by Feral Bite, being Darkness, Cursed, Confused, Slow, Weak, and Silenced. So while wearing this, you are completely immune to Feral Bite and its debuffs, and will get given the damage boost that is granted by having Feral Bite. However, this accessory does decrease player damage by 8%, resulting in only a 12% boost instead of Feral Bite's 20% damage boost. Also, due to this accessory defending the player against various debuffs, it's a rather good accessory to have on hand. And then we've got the Flawless weapon, the Batosphere, which is a summoning weapon. This weapon spews bats in all directions until your minion cap is full. These minions completely ignore up to 15 points of enemy defense. Right, that's everything on Gigabat. Let's crack on with this fight. Moving on to the hard mode bosses. First up we have Sun Pixie. This boss is meant to be summoned in the Hallow and is intended to be fought after a 1 mechanical boss has been defeated. As for this boss's drops, it can drop up to 10 to 19 Souls of Light depending on normal or expert mode. The Laser Cutter, which is a melee weapon which fires a massive beam. The Solar Scarab Staff, which is a summoning weapon, also shown off previously. The Flare Caller, which is a grenade that fires a laser beam downwards depending on where it lands. The Blazing Iris, which is a magic javelin weapon which can either be thrown as a spear or stabbed into the target itself. The Solar Energizer, which is an accessory which when equipped reduces mana usage by 10% and dealing damage with non-magic weapons will restore a small amount of mana. Then you got your Sun Trophy, your Sun Mask, and the Expert stuff. The Expert drops are the Winged Everlight, which is a light pet that generates a large amount of light and follows the cursor. And the Everlight, which generates a large amount of light while held. This light will follow around the cursor. While holding right click, the player can also move the camera around, similar to the rifle scope, for much easier cave exploration. And then we have the Flawless drop, being the Ray of Sunshine, which summons a large beam of light at the cursor's position. This pierces through tiles and enemies infinitely. Right, that's it from Sun Pixie. On to the fight. Moving on to Esophage. This is intended to be fought after all mechanical bosses have been defeated alongside Plantera. There's two ways you can summon this boss, either by defeating the Pestilence Event, or summoned with the fleshy carapace. As for the drops, it drops Evil DNA, Souls of Night up to 12 to 22 depending on normal or expert mode, Corrupt Seeds, Crimson Seeds, Purple Solution, Red Solution, up to 20 to 40 Cursed Flames or Ichor, the Esophage Staff, which is a summoning weapon, the Vantage Foot, which is a grapple hook that basically turns you into Esophage itself, the Esophage Trophy, the Esophage Mask, and then onto the expert drop, which is the Adaptive Genes. With the Adaptive Genes equipped, it causes the player's damage and critical strike chance to increase, depending on how high their health is. At the same time, boosts movement speed and life regeneration the lower it is. That's all from Esophage, on to the fight. Alrighty then, let's move on to Eclipxie. While this boss can be fought after all three mechs, it is more intended to be fought after Golem has been defeated. To summon Eclipxie, you'll need a Hallowed Star, the same Hallowed Star which you use to summon some Pixie. However, if you use the Hallowed Star in a solar eclipse, it'll summon Eclipxie instead of some Pixie. As for the drops from Eclipxie, you'll get either 10 to 25 Eclipxie dust depending on normal or expert mode, the Solar Pendant, which is an accessory, which when equipped the player will take 50% less damage from any hit and trigger the Solar Pendant cooldown buff for 10 seconds. While this is active, the player deals double damage, however the player will also receive double damage. The Blacklight, which is a handheld laser, which goes through enemies and tiles infinitely. The Solar Eye Staff, which is a summoning minion. The Sun Sliver, which is a bow that fires 4 arrows at the same time, each arrow travelling at a different speed. The Lunarang, which when thrown acts as a normal boomerang, however upon coming into contact with an enemy or returning to the player, will start homing in on the nearest enemy to it. The Lunarang will sit on top of the enemy and deal constant collision damage. The Solarang, which when thrown acts as a normal boomerang, however upon coming into contact with an enemy or returning to the player, it'll home in on the nearest enemy to it and begin orbiting that enemy while firing a fire laser. The Eclipxie wings, which are slightly weaker than the Fishron wings, however their advantage being, while floating downwards, your descent speed is incredibly slow. Then you've got your Eclipxie trophy and your Eclipxie mask. And onto the expert drop, which is the Solar Calibrator. This is an accessory which, when the player deals a maximum of 25,000 damage, a buff will activate for 3 seconds, which causes the player to have guaranteed critical hit strikes. This even includes things that can't actually do critical hits normally, such as summoning weapons. And that's everything to do with Eclipxie. On to the fight itself. Now that Eclipxie is down, moving on to Hemorrhage. Hemorrhage requires the fleshy carapace to be summoned, just like Esophage. However, similar to Eclipxie and some Pixie, Hemorrhage requires the fleshy carapace to be used during a blood moon to be summoned, otherwise you'll just get Esophage. As for this abomination's drops, we've got the Hemorrhagic Fluid, which drops either 10 to 25 depending on normal or expert mode. The Volatile Heart, which is an accessory, which when equipped gives a chance for any attack dealt to an enemy to cause a small bloody explosion, which will cause the same amount of damage to the target 1 to 3 times that the weapon itself would have dealt to the enemy. For example, if you dealt 50 damage and this effect triggered 3 times, it'll deal 50 damage 3 times. The explosion of blood particles can also cause this effect if coming into contact with other enemies. Then we've got Phagocyte, which is a boomerang, which when coming into contact will stick to an enemy and deal significant damage the more phagocytes that are attached to the enemy, very similar to the bone javelin. Then we've got the Hemorrphage, which is a ranged weapon. When the bullet from this weapon comes into contact with an enemy, it creates a large blood explosion which deals a second hit to the target that was hit, but also hits anything around the explosion. The Blood Dicer, which fires blood sword projectiles which bounce several times before homing in on the nearest enemy. The Bleeding Sky, which rains blood from the sky. Then you got your Hemorrhage Trophy, your Hemorrhage Mask, and onto the expert drops. First one being the Bloody Blood Cell. This is a small spider pet that resembles Hemorrhage. And the Bloodbearer, which is an accessory that causes 8 tentacles similar to Hemorrhage's tentacles, which stick out around the player, staying at a perfect horizontal, vertical and diagonal angle. When any enemy is in range of these tentacles, they will spew blood to deal near constant damage. And that's it for Hemorrhage. Let's get his fight underway. Now, on to the final boss, the Polarities. The Polarities are intended to be fought after Lunatic Cultist, but before Moonlord. The Polarities need to be summoned by using a supercharged battery. They can be summoned in the day or night, or any time really. As for the drops from these two, you've got 15 to 35 polarized bars, which makes a variety of weapons, armors, and accessories. The Souls of Smite, which are also used to make various weapons, armors, and accessories. The EMP, which fires a large electromagnetic energy blast around the player. The Arc Bolter, which summons a ring of 6 arrows around the cursor that shoot towards it while consuming only 1 arrow from the inventory. If wooden arrows are used as ammunition, they'll be converted into 3 electric and 3 magnetic arrows. The Diamagnetic Discharge, which fires 2 blasts of energy. The blue discharge is faster but has no special properties, while the red discharge is slower but homes in on nearby enemies. The Magnetic Streams, which generates 8 streams of light that spread out in a circle around the player, curving to coverage on their cursor in a pattern resembling a magnetic field. The beams will pass through terrain and can stretch out infinitely, dealing rapid damage to any enemy in their way, and will automatically lock on to any on-screen enemies. The Dipole Staff, which summons the Polarities as minions. The blue one will fire a laser beam, and the red one firing homing rockets. The Electric Wings, which have very high stats, for their time in the game. Then you've got the Polarities Trophy, the Magneton Mask, and the Electrise Mask. As for the Expert drop, we've got the Electrodynamic Tunnel. When equipped, pressing the hotkey, which is defaulted to P, will cause the player to teleport to the opposite of your cursor. It's positioned based on the distance and angle between the two, essentially covering twice the distance between the two as opposed to the Rod of Discord only bringing you to the cursor. Each teleport inflicts 5 seconds of chaos state, causing the player to lose 2/7 of their maximum health if they use the teleport again during chaos state. Right, that's it on polarities. Before the polarities begin, Turing Complete 30 is going to give a very in-depth guide on how the polarities move. I would explain it, but I don't have the vocabulary for it because I'm British. I don't know if you've noticed, but the British vocabulary isn't that great sometimes.
So the way the polarities move is confusing at first, and to be honest, a lot of learning the fight is learning how they move, like sort of on an intuitive level. But for a sort of rigorous explanation of what it is that they're doing, imagine that there's a sphere centered around the player, and as the player is moving, that sphere rolls. And then you can view the polarities as being at 2 antipodal points of that sphere, but like being projected down onto the plane with the player. And that sounds a little confusing, but basically what that means is that when they are sort of on opposite sides of the player, far away from them, they're both going to be moving at around the same speed when the player moves, whereas if they're closer to the player, that'll be like if one of them was on the point of the sphere where it is rolling and the other's on the opposite point, so one of them will be close to still, while the other one will be moving around twice as fast as the player. And that has a number of interesting effects in the fight. Like, for example, if you're far away, the death rays that sort of track the player, because when the player moves, both of them will move at around the same rate as the player, so they'll get it'll be much harder to move out of the way as opposed to when you're closer. There's a bunch of other ways that influences the fight as well, so you sort of need to learn those.
And, well, that's it for Polarities. Well, that was fun. Chaotic, with lots of trouble, and lots of crashing software, and loads and loads and loads of voiceovers. But it was worth it. This mod is fantastic. I'll always happily come back to it whenever there's a boss rework. Well, I say the video's over. We do have one final segment, and that segment is from Turing Complete 30 himself. He was kind enough to participate in this video with his own little part on thanking people that helped him out, giving away spoilers, and just genuinely talking about polarities. So, here he is, Turing Complete 30. Take it away.
Hi, I am Turing Complete 30. Turing is an acceptable diminutive. I have been coding for, quite a while. At least since middle school, which obviously was several years ago. So, I've been coding Terraria stuff for a bit over a year now. So considerably less time than just coding as a whole. The things that inspired me to make the mod were honestly Calamity, because it was the first mod that I was introduced to. I'm sure that's not an uncommon thing. And just the fact that I had a bunch of ideas and felt like, oh, it might be fun to try to implement some of them because I already knew some coding stuff and thought it might be fun. I did not expect to spend as much time on it as I have. So, kind of snowballed. I wanted to also credit all of the people who've contributed sprites to the mod because I'm not exactly a stellar spriter, and without them the mod would not look nearly as good as it is, and also it probably wouldn't have nearly as much content because, honestly, having other people help with the sprites makes other stuff faster as well. And I'd like to give a shout out to Bobby Boy 2 for keeping the wiki insanely up to date, and that helps me organize stuff a lot, so that's also made it a lot easier to develop the mod. So thanks to all of them, and thanks to everyone who's supported the mod just in general. I know I'm going on for a long time about this, but it's a thing. In terms of some upcoming plans, the most important thing that I think I need to work on is expanding and polishing the fractal dimension and the salt and limestone biomes, particularly the salt biome. The limestone biome, aside from a bit of inconsistency in the sprites, is getting close to done content-wise, at least for now. The salt one's considerably more bare bones. And then the fractal dimension, I have a lot of ideas for that, and I obviously just need to start implementing them. All of them still need a good deal of work. I also plan to add a hollowed counterpart to the Pestilence at some point. I obviously need to add flawless items for the bosses that don't have them yet, and then there might be some new bosses in the future, particularly for the fractal dimension, and also eventually maybe post-Moonlord, though that's not for a while. Because I want to make sure the pre-Moonlord segment of the mod is good before I start trying to expand into post-Moonlord. And yeah, again, I'm Turing. Thanks for having me on. Bye.